A single forbidden door stands between Elara and the city's salvation. She slips into the archives, knowing this act could end her magical career. Ancient Snow Elf rituals are locked away here, and she believes they are the only way to calm the violent magic surging through the streets. Her desperate search is a race against the clock and her own mentor's trust. By the end of this story, you will understand how forgotten ceremonies can reshape our entire world. What happens when lost knowledge is the only thing that can save the future? I am curious, where are you listening from right now, and what is the time for you? Would you risk everything for a secret that could change magic? Forever, her fingers brushed against a scroll, so cold it seemed to swallow the warmth from her hands. It was encased in a shell of clear, ancient ice, and within its frozen core, she could see the faint, luminous script of the Snow Elves. This was it, the Rite of Harmonic balance. With a whispered word of unbinding, the ice shattered, not with a crash, but with a silent, expanding ring of pure energy. A pulse of raw, ancient magic surged out from the scroll, washing over her and rushing through the stone archives. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, the city's protective wards flickered and died. Then the alarms began to sound. Distant shouts echoed down the corridors. The Mage Council knew. Worse, a familiar, calculating presence brushed against her senses. Kale, her rival, had felt the disturbance too. She stood frozen, the scroll heavy in her hands. To stay and explain was to risk having the ritual confiscated, dismissed as a dangerous myth. To run was to become an outlaw. The choice was a knife's edge. She tucked the scroll securely inside her robes and ran. Her flight through the grand halls was a blur of panic and purpose. She was no longer just a scholar pushing boundaries. She was a suspect in an act of magical endangerment. The stakes had just been irrevocably raised. Slipping into the shadowy lanes of the city's lower districts, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and smoke, she felt a new prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. She was not alone. Her desperate discovery had not gone unnoticed, and now she was being hunted. The apothecary's air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and old paper, a sanctuary of dust and forgotten things. Elara found Finian hunched over a cluttered desk, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. Without a word, she unrolled the scroll on his desk, the luminous Snow Elf script, casting a soft, ethereal light across his wrinkled face. His breath caught. He traced a symbol with a trembling finger, his initial shock hardening into grim understanding. This was the Rite of Harmonic balance, he confirmed, a ceremony designed to weave volatile magical currents back into a state of peaceful resonance. But his hope was immediately tempered by a severe warning. The ritual was not a simple incantation. It was a symphony that required specific components to act as its instruments. A petrified sapling from the Glade of Whispers, water from the frozen heartspring, and a shard of the Sky Singer crystal. Each was tied to a sacred Snow Elf site, places now either zealously guarded by the Mage Council or lost to time and treacherous geography. Finian leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. He would not help her. To do so was to invite the full wrath of the council down upon them both. He was an old man, his revolutionary days long behind him. This is when Elara's desperation found its voice. She spoke not of her own fate, but of the city, of the magical spasms that were cracking foundations terrifying children. She argued that their current magic, for all its power, was a blunt instrument, while the Snow Elf rituals were a surgeon's scalpel, precise and gentle. The old ways were not a threat, they were the only viable solution. Her conviction, raw and earnest, began to erode his fear. He saw in her the fire he himself had once possessed. Seeing his resolve waver, Elara made a vow. She would gather the components herself. All she needed from him was knowledge, a map, and his guidance to find what was lost. The physical danger would be hers alone. This final plea tipped the scales. With a heavy sigh, Finian agreed, unrolling a yellowed parchment to sketch the treacherous path to the Frostpeak Mountains, where the Glade of Whispers was said to reside. But as his charcoal moved across the paper, he delivered one last, chilling piece of information. The council did not operate solely through official decrees and public arrests. They had eyes everywhere, informants and spies, who watched for any flicker of unauthorized magic, any whisper of dissent. Their collaboration, from this moment forward, was a dance on a razor's edge. With the map secured and the first destination clear, Elara slipped out into the gathering twilight, her mind fixed on the mountains and the perilous journey ahead. She pulled her hood low, a solitary figure against the city's sprawling stone, completely unaware that from a high window across the street, a pair of keen, ambitious eyes followed her every move. Kale had found his quarry, and the hunt was now truly underway. The wind on the Frostpeak slopes was a razor's edge, slicing through her cloak with a bitter, unrelenting cold. Elara pressed her gloved hands against the ice, channeling a thin, precise thread of warmth to melt just enough for a handhold. This was not the grand, showy magic of the city academies, but a delicate, whispered art, a careful manipulation of energy designed to leave the smallest possible signature. Each placement of her boot, each melted handhold, was a calculated risk. The hidden paths Finian had sketched were little more than fractured ledges and treacherous, wind-scoured gullies. For hours, the only sounds were the howl of the gale and the crunch of her own movements. Then a new sound joined the symphony, a high, crystalline chittering that seemed to emanate from the ice itself. Ice wraiths. Her use of magic, however subtle, had drawn them. She saw their forms then, shimmering distortions in the air, gliding over the ice with a predatory grace. They were territorial, and she was an intruder. Stealth was no longer an option. Speed was her only ally. Abandoning all pretense of quiet progress, she scrambled upward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cave entrance, a dark maw in the glittering white face of the mountain, seemed to taunt her with its distance. The chittering grew louder, closer. A blast of supernatural cold seared past her shoulder, frosting the rock where she had just been standing. She had to make a choice, and fast. Drawing on her last reserves of focused will, she wove a complex silencing charm around herself. It was a desperate gamble, a spell that would muffle the sounds of her flight and her frantic breathing, but it would drain her, leaving her nearly defenseless if the wraiths caught her in the open. The world around her fell into an eerie, muted silence, the wraiths' cries now just faint, vibrationless tremors in the air. She pushed her burning muscles harder, her vision tunneling on the dark opening. With a final, lunging leap, she tumbled into the cavern's mouth, rolling onto the rough, frozen stone, just as a wraith's claw scraped against the ledge outside. For a moment, she lay there, panting in the profound quiet, the silencing spell dissipating. She was safe. Pushing herself up, her eyes adjusted to the dim blue light, filtering from strange, phosphorescent fungi clinging to the walls. And there, in the center of a small, secluded grotto, it grew, the luminescent frost bloom. Its petals were like carved sapphire, radiating a soft, internal light that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, as if breathing with the mountain itself. It was more beautiful than any illustration. As she reached for it, her fingers just brushing the cool, magical stem, the entire cave shuddered. A deep, groaning roar filled the air as the ceiling behind her gave way. She threw herself forward, shielding the frost bloom with her body, as rock and ice crashed down, sealing the entrance in a tomb of debris. The dust swirled in the frost bloom's eerie glow, and in the sudden, suffocating silence, a new sound reached her. It was not the wind, nor the wraiths. It was the crisp, clear sound of boots, crunching on loose stone. Well, well, a familiar voice echoed from the newly formed tunnel behind the cave-in. It seems we have both found what we were looking for. Elara. Kale was already inside, trapped with the cave sealed and her rival blocking the only other exit. Elara realized her only choices were to find a hidden path deeper into the mountain's heart, or to turn and face the confrontation she had run so far to avoid. Kale's silhouette was sharp against the fractured ice, his expression a mask of cold authority. The council sent me, Elara. You are to surrender the scroll and come with me for reckless endangerment of the archives. His voice was calm, but his hand rested on the hilt of his focus crystal. The ritual is not a weapon, Kale, she countered, her own voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It is a cure. The city is tearing itself apart. His eyes narrowed, and you think a forgotten ceremony will save it. You are tampering with forces you do not understand. He took a step forward, his boot crunching on the icy floor. This is your last chance to comply. Their raised voices, charged with tension and conflicting magic, vibrated through the cavern. The unstable ice formations above them groaned in response. A sharp crack echoed, and then a shower of massive icicles shattered down between them, a glittering, deadly curtain. Elara threw herself back, shielding the frost bloom as shards of ice ripped through the air. When the cascade settled, a wall of broken ice separated her from Kale, but the cost was devastating. A long, deep crack now ran through the stem of the luminescent frost bloom, its inner light flickering erratically like a dying heartbeat. It was damaged, its magical potency leaking away. From the other side of the icy barrier, Kale's voice was muffled but clear. You see, this is what your recklessness brings, chaos and ruin. Her choice was immediate and instinctual. Fighting him here, in this fragile space, risked destroying the flower completely and burying them both. She could not win a direct confrontation, not while protecting the ritual's only hope. Trusting him was impossible. His allegiance was to the council's rigid law, not to the city's desperate need. She had to run. Focusing her will, she whispered a short, sharp phrase and slammed her palm against the cave floor. A brilliant, deafening flash of light erupted, flooding the cavern with a blinding whiteness. It was a simple diversion spell, a child's trick amplified, but it was enough. She heard Kale cry out in surprise and pain, as his vision was seared. Turning, she plunged deeper into the cave system, into the unknown darkness, the faltering frost bloom clutched tightly in her hand. The council was not merely disapproving, they were actively hunting her, and now the first component was failing. Her escape was a temporary victory that felt profoundly like a defeat. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing still and ancient. The blue glow of the fungi faded, replaced by a soft, inherent luminescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She slowed, her breath catching. Carved into the smooth, dark stone were flowing, intricate patterns. They were not mere decorations. They were Snow Elf inscriptions, and as her fingers traced the elegant lines, they began to glow with a gentle, silver light. The symbols seemed to tell a story of a great journey, of a sacred spring whose waters could heal magical wounds and restore balance. One symbol in particular, a spiral that resembled a frozen whirlpool, pulsed with a stronger light. It was a map and a message. The Heartspring was not lost. It was waiting, and the path to it was written here, on these walls, for anyone who knew how to look. The silver light from the inscriptions pulsed beneath her fingertips, a silent, waiting language. Elara traced the spiral symbol again, and the story unfolded in her mind. It spoke of the ritual of echoes, a practice not of force, but of resonance. The ancient Snow Elves did not break their secrets open. They sang to them, and the world answered. To find the hidden path to the Sunken Grove, she would have to match the magical frequency of this place, creating a harmonic key. She knelt, placing her palms flat on the cold stone. Closing her eyes, she began to hum, a low, steady tone that was not a spell, but a memory of one. She poured her intent into the sound, visualizing not a door, but a seam in reality, a fold in the world that had been tucked away for safekeeping. The effort was immense, like trying to push against the weight of centuries. The silver light from the walls flowed down, converging on her, and for a breathtaking moment, her own magic and the cave's latent energy became one single, vibrating chord. Then, with a soft sigh of shifting stone, a section of the wall simply faded, revealing a dark, descending passage that smelled of wet earth and ancient bark. The success was immediate, and so was the cost. A wave of profound weariness washed over her, so heavy her knees buckled. Her magical reserves, already strained from the climb and the flight, were nearly empty. She felt hollowed out, a vessel scraped clean. Every instinct told her to rest, to wait for her strength to return, but the air still hummed with the echo of a ritual. Kale would have felt that. He would be coming. Pushing herself up, she steadied herself against the cool wall. The grove held the next component, a petrified snow leaf, and reaching it was the only thing that mattered. If she could prove the ritual worked, if she could retrieve the leaf, it would validate everything, turning her from a fugitive into a pioneer. But if she failed here, drained and alone, she would be lost in a magical wilderness with no way forward and no strength to go back. The passage was narrow and unstable, its ceiling held up by the gnarled, protruding roots of immense, unseen trees. Each step was a careful negotiation between her trembling legs and the shifting earth. She moved by feel alone, one hand always on the wall, her breath loud in the utter blackness. It felt like an eternity, this slow, blind journey downward, her fatigue a constant, gnawing companion. Then a faint green glow appeared ahead, growing steadily until she emerged, blinking, into a sight that stole what little breath she had left. The Sunken Grove was a vast, subterranean forest, its ceiling a dome of glowing moss that mimicked a twilight sky. Trees of polished, petrified wood reached upward, their leaves not of organic matter, but of delicate, stone lace that chimed softly in a breeze she could not feel. It was a place of breathtaking, silent beauty, a cathedral frozen in time and standing guard at its heart, directly in front of the tree that bore the stone leaf she needed, was a figure hewn from the same living rock as the grove itself. It was a golem, taller than 2 men, its form a graceful, powerful amalgamation of wolf and warrior, carved with the same flowing script as the cave. It did not move, it did not breathe. It simply was a silent, immovable guardian, waiting for a challenge that had not come in 1,000 years. The golem did not move to strike, but its presence was an unyielding wall. Each time Elara stepped toward the petrified tree, the stone guardian shifted, blocking her path with a silence more threatening than any roar. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the grove's serene chimes. She remembered the scroll's margins, sketches of formal greetings and respectful gestures used to approach sacred sites. With trembling hands, she slowly formed one of them, a palms-up motion that ended with her fingers curling inward over her heart, a sign of peaceful intent. The golem's head tilted, its stony eyes, 2 polished obsidian orbs, fixed on her. Then it moved not to attack, but to teach. One massive hand rose, and a complex pattern of light, a weaving lattice of silver and blue, bloomed in the air before it. The meaning was clear. Replicate this. The first pattern was simple, a basic harmonic sequence. Her exhausted mind fumbled, her own magical construct flickering and nearly dying before she stabilized it. The golem watched impassive. The second pattern was more intricate, a flowing melody of interlocking arcs. Her focus frayed, the magical fatigue making her perception swim. One misplaced line, one unstable frequency, and the test would be over. The consequences of failure were a terrifying unknown. She closed her eyes, shutting out the immense pressure. She thought not of the magic itself, but of why she was here. She visualized the city's fractured streets, the fear in people's eyes, the desperate need for the gentle balance this ritual promised. She poured that intent, that pure, desperate purpose into her hands. When she opened her eyes again, her movements were sure. She wove the light not as a student copying a lesson, but as a practitioner continuing a tradition. The silver and blue lattice she created hung in the air, perfect and resonant. A deep, grinding hum vibrated from the golem's core, a sound of approval that shook the very stones under her feet. It stepped aside, its formidable presence now a respectful guard rather than a barrier. With a reverence she felt to her bones, Elara reached out and carefully broke a single leaf from the petrified branch. It was cool and surprisingly light, its stone filaments etched with a natural, perfect geometry. A surge of triumphant hope flooded her, so potent it momentarily washed away her weariness. She had done it. She had proven the old ways could be understood, but that profound hum had been more than a signal of success. It was a magical beacon, a declaration that the grove's ancient wards had been fulfilled. As she turned to leave, her senses, heightened by the ritual, caught a disturbance at the grove's entrance. Figures clad in the deep blue robes of the Mage Council were fanning out, their movements efficient and coordinated. And at their head stood Kale, his gaze locked on her, the stolen leaf clearly visible in her hand. There would be no going back the way she came. Her only path now was deeper into the unknown, to find the final component, and hope she could reach the city before its magic tore itself completely apart. The apothecary's door clicked shut, sealing Elara and Finian in a fragile pocket of quiet. She laid the two components on his workbench, the flickering frost bloom and the stone leaf that chimed softly against the wood. Finian's hands, though still trembling, moved with a renewed purpose. He ground the petrified leaf into a fine, iridescent dust, then carefully suspended it within a solution he had already prepared. As he added the last few drops of the frostbloom's essence, the mixture in the crystal flask did not just glow, it began to breathe. A gentle, rhythmic pulse of silver light radiated from it, washing through the small shop in a visible wave. The chaotic magical pressure that had become a constant background hum in the city suddenly softened, like a tense muscle finally relaxing. For the first time in weeks, the air itself felt calm. Outside the grimy window, a small crowd began to gather, people drawn not by noise, but by the sudden, inexplicable sensation of peace. They peered in, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and desperate hope. Finian watched them, his own hope warring with a deep, familiar fear. "This attention is a beacon, Elara," he whispered, his voice tight. "The council will not ignore a public display of unauthorized magic. It makes us a target." But Elara looked past him at the faces in the street. She saw not a threat, but potential allies. These were the people whose homes were shaking, whose children were afraid. They were not the enemy. For so long, she had operated in shadows, trusting only Finian. Now she made a different choice. She stepped outside. Her words were not a grand speech, but a quiet explanation. She spoke of balance, of the old ways offering a gentler touch. She asked if anyone had heard stories, family tales of a crystal heart that could sing magic into harmony. An old woman, her hands knotted with age, shuffled forward. She spoke of the Heartstone, a gem lost when the old canals were sealed generations ago, said to lie where the purest water once flowed. It was a rumor, a fragment, but it was a direction. This small act of trust, of sharing her mission, fed a new kind of strength in her. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a symbol. But symbols are easily seen. That night, as she and Finian pored over a map of the forgotten waterways, planning their descent into the damp, dark canals, a soft rustle came from under the door. A single, folded slip of parchment lay on the floor. The message was brief and written in a frantic, unfamiliar hand. It held only a warning: the council moves at dawn. They know about the components. They are coming to confiscate everything. The fragile sanctuary of the apothecary had hours left. Their race for the final piece had just become a desperate, final sprint against the coming light. The frigid water of the canal was a shock, swallowing the last of the city's warmth. Elara and the small band of volunteers moved in a tight formation, their hands cupping spheres of mage light that cast wavering, uncertain beams through the murk. The submerged ruins of the Snow Elves were a ghostly landscape. Below them, carved archways and elegant pillars now home to silt and blind fish. The current tugged at their robes, a constant, whispering reminder of the depth and the darkness. They fanned out, their lights sweeping across the stone, searching for a glimmer that was not their own. It was one of the volunteers, a young man whose sister had been injured in a magical surge, who found it. He pointed, his light trembling. There, nestled in a recess of a crumbled statue depicting a water spirit, was the Heartstone. It pulsed with a soft, blue-white light, a tiny, captive star. But a shimmering, translucent barrier surrounded it, a dome of swirling water that hummed with latent power. One of the mages, acting on instinct, sent a probing lance of energy toward it. The barrier did not break. It absorbed the magic and reflected it back with doubled force, the rebounding spell slamming into the canal wall and sending a shower of debris into the water. Any direct magical assault would only make the defense stronger. Elara treaded water, her mind racing. The Snow Elves did not conquer nature, they worked with it. This was not a lock to be picked with power, but a puzzle of flow and patience. She turned to the group, her voice a series of bubbles she shaped with a minor air charm. She instructed them to create a current, a physical diversion, using their bodies and focused, non-aggressive spells to push and pull the water itself. They began to stir the canal into a slow, powerful whirlpool. The water barrier wavered, its energy distracted by the massive, physical movement around it, its surface rippling as it tried to stabilize against the new, mundane force. This was her chance. Taking a deep breath, Elara dove, swimming not with magic, but with sheer, determined strength. She kicked hard, pulling herself through the churning water, past the edge of the shimmering dome. The barrier, designed to counter spells, did not react to a simple, physical presence. Her fingers closed around the smooth, cool surface of the Heartstone. As she pulled it free, a wave of profound, calming energy washed out from it, a silent chord that resonated through the water and up into the very stones of the city above. For a moment, they all felt it, a deep and ancient peace. They surfaced together, gasping and triumphant, the Heartstone glowing brightly in Elara's hand. But their victory was short-lived. As they wiped the water from their eyes, they saw them, lining the canal bank, silhouetted against the gray dawn sky, were a dozen figures in the deep blue robes of the Mage Council. And at their center, his expression unreadable, but his stance rigid with purpose, stood Kale. Kale's voice cut through the morning air, sharp and formal. Elara, by the authority of the Mage Council, you will surrender the components and submit to custody. Do this, and the others will be spared any charge. Continue this path, and every person here will be branded an accomplice, an outlaw to be hunted. His ultimatum hung between them, a blade poised to fall. The volunteers around her, ordinary citizens who had only wanted to help, froze. Their hopeful expressions crumpled into fear. They looked to her, their safety now irrevocably tied to her next words. She felt the weight of their trust, a heavier burden than any magical artifact. To surrender meant the ritual would be locked away forever, the city left to its slow unraveling. To fight right here and now would put every one of them in immediate danger. Her choice was not just about magic, it was about people. She met Kale's gaze, her voice clear and steady, carrying over the water. I will not let you punish them for my choices, but I will not surrender the only hope this city has. She turned to the group, her words rapid and low. Go now, split up and get to the safe house. Do not look back. I will draw their attention. For a heartbeat, they hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. Then, as one, they scattered, melting into the labyrinth of canal-side passages. Elara did not wait. She channeled a surge of raw energy into the Heartstone, not to use its power, but to make it blaze like a beacon. She turned and ran in the opposite direction, a brilliant, shining target. Shouts erupted from the council mages as they gave chase, their focus entirely on her. It was a desperate, calculated diversion. By the time she slipped into the chaotic, crowded lanes of the city's magical quarter, the official warrant for her capture was already being drafted. She was no longer a suspect. She was a fugitive, huddled in a dusty attic room overlooking a street of enchanted trinket shops. The reality of her situation settled upon her. The three components, now gathered and pulsing with a unified, gentle light on the floor before her, were a testament to her success, but they were also a countdown timer. The council would tear the city apart to find her, and every moment she waited increased the risk of the ritual being lost again, this time for good. She had to perform the ceremony soon, not in some perfectly prepared sacred space, but here, in the city's heart, before the hunters closed in. The cellar air was thick with the scent of old earth and nervous sweat. Elara knelt in the center of the cramped space, the three ritual components arranged before her on a rough wool blanket. Their combined glow painted the faces of her small band of allies in shifting hues of silver and blue. This was the rite of harmonic balance, she explained, her voice low but clear. It was not a spell to be cast upon the city, but a resonance to be woven directly into its magical heart. To work, it required a convergence point, a place where the city's primary ley lines crossed deep beneath the central plaza. That node was the city's anchor, and the only place powerful enough to broadcast the ritual's calming effect to every street and ward. A murmur of unease rippled through the group. The central plaza was the most heavily patrolled, most public space in the entire city. To perform an illegal ritual, there was not just risky, it was madness. One man, a baker whose shop windows had cracked from the magical tremors, voiced the fear they all felt. The council's enforcers will be on us in minutes. We cannot fight that kind of power. Elara listened, her own fear a cold stone in her stomach. She saw the doubt in their eyes, the calculation of risk against the safety of their own families. They needed more than a theory. They needed a reason to believe. She took a slow breath, her gaze dropping to the glowing Heartstone. My younger sister, Lyra, she began, her voice softening. Her magic has always been bright, but these recent surges have made it unstable. It hurts her. She can't control it. Last week, she accidentally turned her entire room to frost. She looked back at the group, her vulnerability laid bare. I am doing this for her, for all the children like her, who should not have to live in fear of the gift inside them. That simple, personal confession shifted the air in the room. The abstract concept of saving the city became the immediate, tangible goal of protecting their own. The baker's defiant expression softened into one of grim resolve. They would create a diversion. While Elara worked at the ley line node, they would stage a series of minor, noisy magical incidents in the merchant districts, pulling the council's guards away from the plaza in a frantic, scattered chase. The plan was a delicate house of cards, reliant on perfect timing and unwavering nerve. A single misstep, a moment of hesitation from any one of them, would not just mean arrest. A ritual interrupted at the ley line node could cause a catastrophic magical backlash, a wave of raw energy that would shatter the plaza and everyone in it. They were finalizing their roles, a tense, focused energy binding them together, when the cellar's hidden door swung open. A young woman, breathless from running, slipped inside. Her report was a blade of ice. The scout had seen them, she gasped. Council mages, led by Kale himself, were gathering at the plaza. They are bringing ward stones and focusing crystals. They mean to seal the entire ley line node at midnight. Midnight's chill bit deep as they slipped from the cellar into a city, holding its breath. Elara led her small team, not through the grand boulevards, but through a hidden city of shadows, up rain-slicked drain pipes, and across the slanted, tile-covered rooftops. Below them, the clatter of armored boots echoed as council patrols swept the main streets. Every leap across a yawning alleyway was a gamble, every flicker of a guard's torchlight a moment of frozen terror. They were a whisper moving against a gathering storm. When they finally dropped into the service corridor that opened onto the central plaza, the sight that greeted them was a fist closing around Elara's heart. The council mages were already there. Kale stood at the center of a ring of his comrades, their focus crystals aimed at the cobblestones where the ley lines crossed. A low hum filled the air as they began to weave a lattice of containment magic, a shimmering, golden net meant to smother the node forever. They had minutes, perhaps less. A direct assault was impossible. Any violent release of magic near the sensitized node would be like throwing a lit torch into a room full of blasting powder. Elara's mind raced, then settled on the one component meant for healing, not harm. She cupped the luminescent frost bloom in her hands. Its light was still faltering from its earlier damage, but its essence remained. With a soft, focused breath, she urged it not to shatter or freeze, but to exhale. A thick, swirling mist of countless microscopic ice crystals billowed from the flower, flowing across the plaza not as a weapon, but as a veil. It was a blinding, brilliant fog that sparkled under the plaza's magical lamplight, obscuring vision and muffling sound without causing any pain or injury. In that moment of confused shouts from the council circle, Elara and her team moved. They were ghosts in the glittering white, slipping through the fractured defensive line and into the sacred space at the plaza's heart. But their window was measured in heartbeats. The alarm was raised. From the edges of the plaza, more blue-robed figures emerged, reinforcing the circle with a second, tighter ring of guards. The ritual site was now the most dangerous place in the city, a trap closing around them. Elara ignored the tightening noose. She knelt at the exact center of the crossing ley lines, the stone humming with pent-up energy beneath her knees. She placed the Heartstone before her, the ground itself seeming to sigh at its touch. To its left, she set the chiming stone leaf, and to its right, the softly pulsing frost bloom. Taking a final, steadying breath, she closed her eyes and began to chant the words from the scroll, the ancient Snow Elf phrases, feeling both foreign and intimately familiar on her tongue. The components began to glow brighter, their individual lights weaving together into a single, rising chord of pure, silvery harmony. The ancient words rose from her lips, not as a command, but as an invitation. A thread of silver light spun from the Heartstone, the stone leaf, and the frost bloom, unspooled from Elara's hands and plunged deep into the cobblestones. For a single, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the plaza hummed, a deep, resonant note that was felt more than heard. The chaotic, jagged energies that had twisted the city's magic for so long began to soften, their sharp edges smoothing into gentle curves. A wave of profound calm radiated outward from the ley line node, washing over the plaza and spreading into the surrounding streets like a silent, soothing tide. The very air seemed to sigh in relief. This sudden, impossible shift did not go unnoticed. Across the city, mages jolted to attention, their senses ablaze with the unfamiliar harmony. From the highest spires of the council towers, figures in deep blue robes appeared, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and severe apprehension. They descended upon the plaza, a silent, formidable audience gathering at the edge of the mist. The council leaders watched, their whispered debate a tense counterpoint to the ritual's gentle music. "Do we stop her?" one elder hissed. "We do not understand the long-term consequences of this ancient power. It could be a temporary bomb that masks a deeper corruption." Another argued, his eyes wide as he felt the stable magic around them. "But look, the chaos is receding. The people are calming. Is this not the peace we have failed to achieve?" Their fear of the unknown warred with the undeniable evidence of success playing out before them. Elara heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to the flow of energy, to the intricate tapestry she was weaving into the city's foundation. She trusted the scroll, she trusted Finian's guidance, and she trusted the quiet wisdom of the Snow Elf teachings that emphasized balance over control. Her focus was absolute, a lone anchor in a sea of swirling power and political doubt. As the ritual's influence expanded, healing the fractured magic in district after district, it created an unintended beacon. Every opponent, every loyalist who saw her as a threat, now knew exactly where she was. She was exposed, performing the most delicate work of her life at the epicenter of all her enemies' attention. The ritual reached its crescendo, the silver light blazing into a brilliant, gentle star at the plaza's heart. It was at that precise moment of peak vulnerability that Kale broke from the council's ranks. He did not raise a weapon or utter a spell of binding. He simply walked forward, his own focus crystal glowing with a pure, untapped light. He met Elara's eyes for a fleeting second, a look that was no longer one of rivalry, but of grim recognition. Then he knelt at the edge of the ritual circle, placed his hands on the ground, and began to channel his own considerable power into the weave. His magic, once a force meant to capture her, now flowed into the ancient pattern, strengthening it, broadening its reach. It was not a surrender, but an alliance forged in the city's moment of greatest need. His voice was low, a stark contrast to the ritual's rising hum. "I saw the magic in the lower districts settle, Elara." The trembling in the children stopped. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the energy they now jointly channeled. "I was wrong." His admission was not an apology, but a statement of fact. His considerable power, once a weapon aimed at her, now flowed seamlessly into the ancient Snow Elf pattern, reinforcing its gentle weave and broadening its calming reach across the city. This was not a surrender, It was a conversion, and it sent a shock wave through the watching council. A fracture appeared in their unified front. A handful of younger mages, their own doubts about the council's rigid methods now validated by the undeniable peace in the air, broke from the ranks. They moved to join the circle, adding their own strength to the harmonic balance. But the elder mages, led by the stern Archmage Valerius, saw only heresy and insurrection. Their fear of the unknown hardened into resolve. Valerius' voice cut through the harmony like shattering glass. "You sanction this recklessness, Kale. You and these traitors spit upon generations of magical law." His hands began to move, weaving a complex, aggressive counterspell designed not to contain, but to sever. He sought to cut the ritual off from the ley line node entirely, an act that would cause a magical rupture, dwarfing any previous surge. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The ritual was at its most delicate peak, a symphony of interconnected energies. To integrate Kale's power was a risk, a gamble that his change of heart was genuine, and not some elaborate ruse to destabilize the weave from within. One flicker of betrayal now would destroy everything. She met his eyes, seeing the same calculated intensity as always, but now it was focused, aligned with her purpose. She made her choice. With a sharp, trusting nod, she created an opening in the ritual's pattern, a deliberate vulnerability. Kale did not hesitate. He channeled his power directly into that opening, and the effect was instantaneous. The silvery light blazed brighter, the wave of harmony washing over the city with renewed, unshakable strength. The ritual was now anchored by two powerful, opposing magics working in concert, giving it a stability that felt almost permanent. But their success was a direct challenge Valerius could not ignore. As the ritual neared its final, breathtaking completion, the lead opposition mage stepped forward, his own counterspell glowing with violent, golden light, ready to challenge them directly. Valerius' golden counterspell slammed into the ritual's weave like a physical blow. The silvery harmony wavered, the ley line node flickering violently as the disruptive magic sought to tear their connection from the earth. The ground beneath them groaned, and the air filled with the screech of stressed energies. A catastrophic collapse was moments away. Defending with a traditional shield would only feed the violent energy, creating an explosion. Elara's mind, however, was already moving past conflict. The scroll had spoken of absorption, not opposition. She pressed her hands against the Heartstone, not to push back, but to open a channel. Instead of resisting Valerius' attack, she invited it in. The violent, golden energy roared into the crystal, and for a terrifying second, it flared, threatening to shatter. But the Heartstone's nature was to heal. It churned the disruptive force, tempering its anger, smoothing its jagged edges, and wove it back into the ritual as a thread of strengthened harmony. The flickering node steadied, its light burning brighter and more stable than before. The ritual had not just survived an assault, it had used the attack's own power to reinforce itself. This undeniable resilience caused the remaining opposition mages to lower their focus crystals, their will to fight broken by the evidence before them. Only Valerius stood unmoved, his face a mask of bitter defeat. He saw not a saved city, but the end of his authority, the overturning of everything he had built. He would never accept these ancient ways. As he turned and vanished into the dispersing crowd, his departure marked a permanent schism. With the threat gone, the ritual completed its work. A deep, resonant chime echoed through the city, and the magic settled into a steady, gentle rhythm, like the calm, reliable heartbeat of the world itself. From the rooftops and streets, a cheer began to swell, tentative at first, then building into a roaring wave of relief and triumph. The crowd's voice rose to meet the magic's new song, a fusion of hope and ancient power reborn. The cheers from the city faded into a heavy, waiting silence within the council chamber. Archmage Valerius was gone, but his empty seat spoke volumes. The remaining leaders, their stern faces illuminated by the now gentle glow of the city's magic through the high windows, regarded Elara and Kale. They did not speak of arrest. Instead, they called for a truce, a formal hearing to understand the power that had accomplished what their own magic could not. It was a fragile chance, not an absolution. Elara stood before the polished stone table, the ancient scroll, and the 3 ritual components laid out as evidence. She did not lecture, she showed them. She explained how the luminescent frost bloom acted not as a damper, but as a filter, smoothing jagged magical edges. She demonstrated how the petrified snow leaf created a resonant lattice, a structure that gave chaotic energy a stable path to follow. And she let them feel the Heartstone, its deep, calming pulse, a testament to healing rather than domination. This was not a replacement for their modern arts, she argued, but a complement. The lost rituals were a forgotten language of balance, a way to make their powerful, modern magic more sustainable and far safer. But trust, once broken, is not easily mended. A senior mage with a deeply lined face gestured to the peaceful city beyond. How can we be certain this is not a temporary lull, a prelude to a greater collapse your methods cannot contain? The old ways were abandoned for a reason. What proof can you offer that this harmony will last? The question hung in the air, the core of all their fears. Elara knew that demanding their immediate, full endorsement would only solidify their opposition. She needed to offer a path forward that respected their authority while proving her theory. So she made her proposal. She suggested a partnership, a formal research initiative under the council's own oversight. They would study the Snow Elf rituals together, testing their principles in controlled environments and applying them to small, manageable magical instabilities throughout the city. It would be a slow, documented process, with every success and failure recorded for the council to scrutinize. The stakes of their decision were absolute. Acceptance would transform her from an outlaw into a pioneer, legitimizing a new branch of magical study. But rejection would brand her work as a permanent danger. The council could exile her to prevent the spread of her ideas, or imprison her to ensure the scroll was never used again. The fate of the old ways and the future stability of the city balanced on a knife's edge. After a long, tense deliberation, the lead Archmage finally spoke. The results in the Plaza cannot be denied, she conceded, her gaze shifting from the scroll to Elara's determined face. We will grant a trial period, one cycle of the seasons to demonstrate the permanence and safety of your methods, and you, Elara, will lead this research, with Kale as your liaison to this council. It was not a full victory, but it was a foothold. A door had been cracked open, and through it, a sliver of the old world's light was now allowed to shine. The new research initiative began in a forgotten wing of the Grand Library, a space that slowly transformed from a tomb of dust into a living archive. Under Elara's direction, and with Kale navigating the Council's bureaucracy, they gathered every recovered Snow Elf artifact, every fragmented scroll, and every stone leaf etching. Finian, his old hands now steady with purpose, became their chief archivist, cross-referencing ancient symbols with modern magical theory. Their work was meticulous, a slow and careful process of translation and adaptation. They were not just preserving relics, they were building a new vocabulary for magic itself. The first practical application was a simple warding gesture, adapted from the Grove Guardian's test. When taught to city mages, it proved astonishingly effective at stabilizing volatile enchantment wards, preventing the small, disruptive explosions that had once been a weekly nuisance. Public trust, once fractured, began a slow and cautious restoration as the magic in the streets became more predictable, more gentle, but not everyone was convinced. Archmage Valerius and his loyalists watched from the shadows, their disapproval a silent, constant pressure. They attended progress meetings, their questions sharp and probing, waiting for a single misstep, one documented failure that would justify shutting the entire project down. The air in the archive was often thick with the tension between groundbreaking discovery and political scrutiny. Faced with this opposition, Elara made a radical decision. She began holding public lectures in the archive, throwing open the doors to any mage who wished to learn. She argued that hoarding this knowledge would only breed the same fear and control that had nearly doomed the city. This openness was a gamble, while widespread adoption could weave the rituals so deeply into the city's magical fabric that they could prevent any future crisis. It also carried a profound risk. An untrained mage attempting a complex harmonic weave without proper understanding could inadvertently twist the gentle magic into something unstable, causing the very chaos they sought to prevent. The stakes of education were as high as the stakes of the original ritual. One afternoon, during a lecture on resonant frequencies, a young apprentice mage across the room fumbled a light summoning charm. The spell flared, threatening to spiral into a blinding flash. Before Elara or Kale could intervene, the apprentice, recalling a basic Snow Elf gesture of calming from a previous talk, formed the sign with trembling hands. The flaring magic did not vanish, it simply settled, its light softening into a steady, manageable glow. A stunned silence fell over the room, followed by a wave of excited murmurs. That single, successful gesture, performed by the youngest among them, was more powerful than any argument. It was a quiet revolution, and it was already beginning to bloom. Lyra found her after the lecture, her small hands clenched at her sides. The city's newfound calm had settled the wild magic inside her, but a new kind of energy, one of fierce determination, now burned in her eyes. She asked Elara to teach her everything, to show her how to speak the language of the old world, so she would never have to fear her own power again. For Elara, the request was a profound turning point. She was no longer just a researcher, she was becoming a mentor. She agreed, and the first formal master-apprentice relationship dedicated to the Snow Elf rituals began. This new bond, however, immediately faced a storm of resistance from Lyra's own family. Her parents, Traditional mages who had built their lives on the council's approved methods saw the old ways as a dangerous and unstable path. They feared that Elara was leading their daughter into obscurity, or worse, into the same outlaw status she had so recently occupied. The dinner table became a quiet battleground, with Lyra's excited descriptions of harmonic weaves met with her mother's worried silence and her father's pointed questions about practical career applications. This conflict was a smaller echo of the schism in the city itself, a personal struggle between the safety of tradition and the perilous promise of innovation. Elara met this challenge with unwavering patience. Her teaching method was a careful fusion, a bridge between two worlds. She would have Lyra practice a modern shielding charm, then show her how to layer a subtle snow elf calming gesture over it, making the shield not just stronger, but more resilient and far less brittle. Every lesson was a balance, proving that the old rituals did not replace modern magic, but refined it, making it safer and more intuitive for the wielder. Lyra, freed from the fear of her own power, was a brilliant student. Her progress was astonishingly rapid. She didn't just learn the techniques, she seemed to understand the intent behind them, the Snow Elf philosophy of cooperation with magical forces rather than domination. Her success became a powerful symbol for the entire research initiative. Supporters pointed to Lyra as living proof that the next generation could wield a kinder, more stable form of magic. But for the opposition, her rapid advancement was a threat. Archmage Valerius's faction watched closely, their criticism sharpening. They whispered that the girl was being pushed too fast, that such profound power in a child's hands was irresponsible, and that Elara was creating a magical prodigy as a political tool. Lyra's every achievement was celebrated by some and scrutinized for failure by others. The day Lyra successfully performed her first complete minor ritual, a simple ceremony to encourage a blighted rooftop garden to bloom, the small, hardy plants unfurled new leaves in a matter of hours. It was a tiny miracle, a testament to harmony. As the team celebrated this quiet victory, a messenger, his cloak still dusted with the fine, cold powder of far-off ice, found Elara in the archive. He pressed a sealed scroll into her hand. The message was brief, its words sending a jolt of anticipation through her. An expedition to the northern wastes had uncovered something frozen deep in a remote glacier, a relic unlike any they had seen before, and its magical signature was unmistakably that of the Snow Elves. The northern winds carried a promise older than the city itself. Elara, Kale, and their small research team followed the messenger's map into a landscape of blinding white and profound silence, where the air was so cold it felt like a physical presence. Their journey ended at a wall of ancient, blue ice. Channeling a gentle, resonant frequency learned from the Heartstone, they watched as the glacier itself responded, a vast, hidden door of ice, shimmering into transparency and then dissolving into mist. Beyond it lay not a tomb, but a sanctuary. The air within was still and dry, and the walls were adorned with murals depicting Snow Elf life in vibrant, unfaded colors. Most importantly, the floor was a single, intricate ritual circle, its lines inlaid with mother of pearl that gleamed with a soft, internal light. This was no simple ceremonial site. It was an observatory and a tuning fork for the world's magic, designed to harmonize energies on a continental scale. The records etched into crystalline panels spoke of rituals that could weave stability into the very ley lines that connected all civilizations. preventing the kind of catastrophic decay that had nearly destroyed their own city. But time was a luxury the glacier would not grant. The seasonal storms were already gathering, and in a matter of days, the ice door would seal shut, locking the sanctuary away for another generation. The team had to choose, and quickly. Some argued for removing the crystal panels, for taking the physical knowledge back to the city, where it could be studied at length. Elara saw the delicate web of energy that hummed through the entire chamber and recognized a terrible risk. To remove a piece was to potentially collapse the entire system, destroying the context that gave the rituals their true power. She made a difficult call. "We document everything," she declared. "We take only copies." So they worked in shifts, using light etching spells to create perfect facsimiles of every mural and inscription, their mage lights flickering against the relentless press of the encroaching winter. This discovery was not just an academic triumph. It was a key that could rewrite the entire history of magic, proving that the Snow Elves were not primitive mystics, but master architects of global stability. Yet as they worked, Kale's sensitive wards detected distant, unfamiliar magical signatures scanning the glacier. They were not alone. Other expeditions, drawn by the ripple of power from their entry, were closing in, hoping to claim the sanctuary's secrets for their own nations, or for private, perhaps less benevolent, purposes. Their race was now against both nature and rivals. They emerged from the ice just as the first blizzard winds began to howl, the glacier sealing behind them with a final, echoing groan. They carried no artifacts, only scrolls filled with meticulously copied knowledge. On the long journey home, Elara knew that hoarding this information would only repeat the old mistakes of the Mage Council. The potential to prevent future magical crises was too great to be kept within one city's walls, and so she began planning an unprecedented symposium, a gathering of the world's magical traditions to share the Snow Elf legacy openly, hoping to build a global alliance founded on balance rather than control. The grand hall buzzed with a dozen different languages, the air thick with the scent of foreign incenses and the subtle hum of varied magical traditions. Elara stood at the center of it all, the crystalline panels from the Glacier sanctuary projected behind her for all to see. Her presentation was not a lecture, but a demonstration. She invited a master of wind magic from the eastern deserts and a water weaver from the coastal islands to join her. Together, they performed a simple ceremony, weaving a modern summoning spell with a foundational Snow Elf Harmonic. The result was not a storm, but a perfect miniature weather system contained within the hall, a gentle rain that nourished a patch of desert blooms, all while maintaining absolute stability. The silence that followed was one of stunned comprehension, then erupted into a wave of excited discussion. Delegations from 3 major nations immediately approached her, proposing formal alliances to integrate these principles into their own magical infrastructures. Research exchanges were drafted on the spot, promising an unprecedented sharing of knowledge across old borders, yet not all voices were supportive. A faction of traditionalist mages from the mountain clans stood, their leaders face a mask of stern disapproval. He declared that this fusion was a corruption, a watering down of their unique cultural heritage into a bland, universal paste. They saw the distinct, beautiful patterns of their ancestral magic being erased in favor of this new, foreign harmony. Elara listened patiently until the hall quieted. In her keynote address, her voice carried not with force, but with clarity. She held up her own focus crystal, a tool of modern magic, and beside it, the stone leaf from the Sunken grove. Our goal is not to replace one tool with another, she explained. It is to add new tools to the workshop. We do not ask you to stop speaking your native tongue. We are offering a universal grammar that can help us all understand one another, and in doing so, prevent the magical crises that threaten every nation equally. She framed it as an act of respect, an adaptation that would allow each culture's unique magic to flourish with greater safety and control. The potential was staggering. A globally adopted harmonic framework could usher in an era of cooperation unlike any in recorded history, a world where magic was a force of shared stability rather than national competition. But the cultural clashes in the hall were a stark reminder that the greatest threat to this future was not magical instability, but pride and fear. As the symposium concluded and the delegates began their journeys home, a royal messenger in livery of deep green and gold requested a private audience with Elara. The neighboring kingdom of Viridia was suffering, its ancient forests withering from a mysterious magical blight their own mages could not cure. They had heard of her work, and their queen was now formally requesting her counsel. The forests of Viridia were dying. Elara and Kale arrived to a landscape of sickly gray trees, an air thick with the metallic tang of corrupted magic. The kingdom's own mages, skilled in life-giving arts, were fighting a losing battle against a blight that twisted their healing spells into further decay. The royal court was a chamber of quiet panic, the young queen's advisors pressing for immediate, decisive action. They wanted the foreign ritual to work, but they were deeply uncomfortable relying on methods so alien to their traditions. The pressure was immense, a silent demand for a miracle that required absolute trust. Elara knew that forcing the Snow Elf ceremony would be seen as an act of cultural imposition. So she did not command, she listened. She spent a day with the local mages, learning the cadence of their nature magic, the way they sang to the soil and whispered to the seeds. She discovered their rituals were already a form of harmony, just on a much smaller, more intimate scale. The true problem was a fracture in the land's primary ley line, a wound too vast for their localized songs to heal. She proposed a fusion. Instead of using the components from her own city, she worked with the Viridian mages to find local equivalents. A crystal formed in a sacred cave replaced the Heartstone. The petrified leaf from a native ancient tree took the place of the snow leaf. Together, they adapted the Rite of harmonic balance, weaving its grand structure with the familiar, gentle melodies of Viridia's own magic. The resulting ceremony was not a replacement, but an amplification. When they performed it at the fractured ley line, the effect was breathtaking. The gray trees did not instantly heal, but their leaves began to regain a faint, hopeful green hue. The corrupting magic receded, stabilizing into a manageable residue that the local mages could now safely cleanse on their own. The kingdom was saved from total collapse. The queen's reluctant trust transformed into fervent support. This success became a powerful diplomatic victory, proving that the Snow Elf principles could be adapted, that they respected and strengthened local traditions rather than erasing them. The stakes of this single mission had been the credibility of the entire endeavor, and their adaptive approach secured a crucial ally. Elara returned home with the Queen's formal endorsement, a document that would sway other hesitant nations. But as she stepped back into the archive, weary from the journey, she found Lyra waiting for her, not with a scroll, but with a large slate covered in glowing, interconnected symbols. The young apprentice's eyes shone with a fierce, quiet excitement. She had not just been studying the Glacier records, she had been deciphering a deeper layer of meaning, a hidden pattern that suggested the observatory was not the only one of its kind. The symbols on Lyra's slate were not just a map, they were a timeline. Her translation of the deeper Glacier texts revealed a prophecy, a stark warning left by the Snow Elves themselves. It spoke of a great unraveling, a future convergence where the world's magic would become so unstable, it would fray at the seams unless ancient and modern practices were woven together into a new, hybrid tradition. This was not merely a suggestion for improvement, it was framed as an essential failsafe for the survival of magic itself. The discovery sent a tremor through the research community. Respected scholars, particularly those who had always viewed the Snow Elves as a cautionary tale, immediately dismissed the prophecy as allegorical myth, a story to illustrate a philosophical point rather than a literal prediction. They argued that dedicating precious resources to a potential future catastrophe was irresponsible when there were so many present-day magical issues to solve. Yet others, looking at the increasing frequency of minor, unexplained magical anomalies across the continent, saw the prophecy as a chillingly accurate diagnosis of a problem already in its earliest stages. The debate created a deep and painful rift among the very people who had worked so hard to build a new consensus. For Elara, the choice was agonizing. To ignore the prophecy was to gamble with the future of every magical society on a scale she could barely comprehend. But to commit their fledgling institute to a generations-long project based on an ancient warning would mean diverting funds, personnel, and political goodwill away from the tangible, immediate needs of their own city and their new allies. After a long, silent night, staring at Lyra's translations, she made her decision. They would investigate. She announced the formation of a long-term project dedicated solely to tracking the prophecy's signs and preparing for the potential convergence. It was a controversial move that alienated some of their more pragmatic supporters. As the project began its work, setting up magical monitoring stations in remote areas, the first reports trickled in. From high mountain valleys and deep, forgotten forests, places once sacred to the Snow Elves, came accounts of strange, localized phenomena. Springs ran with water that glowed with a soft, silver light. Petrified trees began to hum with a low, resonant frequency. The world itself seemed to be whispering that the prophecy was already awakening. The mountain spring ran silver under a pale moon, its waters humming with a power that felt both ancient and new. Elara and her team worked quickly, their movements precise against the biting wind. They placed smooth, resonant stones in a circle around the spring, each one etched with a Snow Elf symbol for listening. This was not a ritual to command, but one to understand, a delicate act of tuning their senses to the land's hidden frequencies. As the last stone was set, the air itself seemed to thicken, and a ghostly image shimmered above the water, a spectral reenactment of a long-forgotten ceremony, a Snow Elf blessing performed centuries ago to heal a crack in the world. These were not random magical surges. They were echoes, memories of power waking from a deep slumber and with each passing week, the echoes grew louder, their images sharper and more potent. The work was grueling and dangerous. In a petrified forest, a misstep during a monitoring ritual caused the trees to unleash a volley of sharp, musical shards that embedded themselves in the ground where a researcher had stood moments before. The constant proximity to such volatile, untamed magic frayed nerves and tested resolve. Some of the team began to argue for a retreat, convinced they were poking a sleeping dragon with a stick. They saw only risk, not revelation, but Elara stood firm, her boots planted in the humming earth. She insisted that every spike in data, every ghostly reenactment, was a piece of a puzzle. By carefully recording the frequency and intensity of each anomaly, they were not just observing the prophecy, they were mapping its trajectory. Their perseverance paid off in a way that was both terrifying and enlightening. At a site where the land bled raw, chaotic energy, they successfully wove a complex harmonic barrier, using their refined understanding to calm the tremors. The moment the land settled into a fragile peace, a surge of energy from the stabilized site shot back through their monitoring stones and directly into Elara. It was not pain, but a flood of pure information. Her vision widened out, and for a single, breathtaking second, she saw it. The convergence was not a single point in time, but a nexus of intersecting ley lines, a celestial clock counting down to a moment when all magic would either harmonize or shatter. She saw the world draped in threads of brilliant, conflicting light, straining at the seams, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, exactly where and when they would need to be to face it. The vision was a tapestry of light and consequence woven directly into her mind. Elara saw the future not as a single event, but as a delicate convergence point where the world's ancient and modern magical streams were destined to meet. At that nexus, they would either braid together into a stronger, more vibrant cord, or they would crash against one another in a cataclysm that would unravel the very fabric of spellwork for generations. The revived Snow Elf rituals were not a shield to block this event. They were the loom and the guide wires, the tools meant to carefully direct the weave. The real danger was not the convergence itself, but a world unprepared to face it. Convincing others became her new and most difficult ritual. She returned from the mountains with a certainty that felt like stone in her soul, but the global community of mages greeted her warnings with a wall of polite skepticism. They saw a prophecy, an old story, not an imminent reality. Their doubts were a familiar refrain. How could they invest vast resources, redirect entire magical economies for a theoretical future problem based on one woman's vision? The political will simply did not exist, so Elara decided to show them. She gathered her most trusted allies and, using the Glacier records and the resonant stones from the awakened sites, she constructed a simulation. It was not a simple illusion, but a complex harmonic echo, a magical model that allowed other mages to step inside the vision and feel the immense pressures of the converging energies for themselves. They experienced the two potential outcomes side by side. In one, they felt the breathtaking harmony, a world where magic became more intuitive, more stable, and more deeply connected to the natural world. In the other, they witnessed the terrifying unraveling, a sensory overload of fractured spells and dying ley lines that left them gasping. The simulation made the abstract terrifyingly real. The stakes of this demonstration could not be higher. If the gathered mages accepted the vision, it would trigger the first truly unified global magical project in history, a cooperative effort on a scale never before attempted. But if they dismissed it as mere trickery or fear-mongering, every nation would be left isolated and vulnerable, their magical traditions crumbling when the convergence finally arrived. The simulation did not demand belief. It presented a choice they could no longer afford to ignore. As the echoes of the simulation faded from the grand hall, a hushed and sobered audience began to process what they had felt. It was in this charged silence that three figures who had been observing from the deepest shadows stepped forward. Their robes were of a simple, undyed fabric, but their eyes held the weight of countless recorded years. They were the keepers of the chroniclers, a reclusive order of historians so secretive most considered them a myth. Their leader, an elder with a voice like turning pages, spoke directly to Elara. "Your simulation is impressive," he said, "but it is incomplete. The Snow Elves left more than prophecies. They left a blueprint, and we have spent lifetimes safeguarding it." The keepers led Elara into a library, carved not from wood and stone, but from solidified memory itself. The air hummed with the preserved whispers of millennia, and the walls shifted with scripts written in light. Here, the keepers of the veil guarded the true legacy of the Snow Elves, not just prophecies, but the practical blueprints for survival. They revealed reconciliation rituals, intricate ceremonies designed specifically to weave conflicting magics together without force. These were the missing pieces, the precise instructions her research had desperately needed to fill its theoretical gaps. Yet this gift came with a heavy price. The head archivist, a woman named Lyra, who shared a name but not a temperament with Elara's apprentice, watched their every move with severe disapproval. She believed that sharing this depth of knowledge with modern mages was a profound betrayal of their sacred duty to remain observers, not participants. Her resistance was a constant, chilling presence in the archives, a reminder that the greatest threat to their progress might not be the convergence, but their own inability to trust one another. Faced with this internal schism, Elara proposed a joint initiative. She would not simply take the rituals, she would work alongside the keepers to adapt them, using her team's understanding of modern magical theory to make the ancient ceremonies applicable on a global scale. It was a promise of mutual respect, a fusion of deep history and urgent innovation. The stakes of this fragile alliance were absolute. Success meant they could greet the convergence not as a cataclysm, but as a controlled, guided event, a rebirth of magic for the entire world. But every day lost to bureaucratic delays or internal arguments brought that future closer to chaos. As their combined teams began the painstaking work of integrating the new rituals, the first concrete reports began to filter in from monitoring stations worldwide. The magical weather was shifting. In deserts, rain fell as shimmering dust. Over oceans, waterspouts danced with silent inner light. The convergence was not a future threat any longer. It was beginning. The sky itself began to fracture. Across the world, auroras of impossible colors bled into the daylight, while in city squares, fountains ran with liquid starlight, and street lamps bloomed with silent, spectral flowers. This was not a localized anomaly. It was the world's magical heartbeat skipping, the convergence beginning in earnest. From their command center, Elara gave the signal, and a network of prepared teams activated the reconciliation rituals simultaneously at dozens of key ley line nodes. Their goal was not to stop the convergence, but to cradle it, to give the merging ancient and modern magics a stable framework in which to intertwine. The initial effect was like a great, shuddering sigh of relief across the planet. The rituals created anchors of profound calm, nodes of harmonic stability that absorbed the first violent shocks of the merging energies and prevented them from ripping the world's magical fabric apart. But the map of these nodes was a map of global strife. One crucial anchor point lay deep in a war-torn desert where rival clans fought over a sacred oasis. Another was situated in the politically volatile straits between two naval powers. Gaining and holding access to these sites required not just magical skill, but desperate diplomacy, covert insertions, and sometimes the sheer, brave presence of local mages who risked everything to protect the ritual circles. Elara, anchoring the central node herself, became a conductor in a global symphony. She delegated tasks with a calm she did not feel, trusting teams she had only ever met through scrying pools to hold their positions against both magical and political pressure. The strain was immense, a constant, thrumming tension in the back of her mind. She felt every flicker of the network, every near failure as a physical jolt. The stakes were absolute, a terrifying chain reaction. If one node fell, the unbalanced energy would surge into the next, overloading it and causing a cascading collapse that would end in a magical hurricane, scouring entire regions. For 3 days and nights, the world held its breath, balanced on a knife's edge between rebirth and ruin. Then, a subtle shift occurred. The chaotic, conflicting streams of magic, instead of warring against the harmonic network, began to flow into it. They braided together along the ley lines, ancient power and modern innovation, merging not with a crash, but with a resonant hum. From these stable nodes, new energies began to emanate, hybrid magics that were both familiar and utterly new, promising a future where the old world and the new could finally sing in one voice. This new hybrid magic felt like a forgotten language suddenly remembered. It flowed with the elegant, intuitive grace of the Snow Elf rituals, yet it possessed the raw, adaptable power of modern spellcraft. Mages who had spent their entire careers wrestling with volatile energies found themselves able to weave spells with a thought and a gesture, their intent guiding the magic as naturally as breathing. The air in cities once thick with the ozone smell of strained spells now carried a fresh, clean scent, like the air after a thunderstorm. Across the world, magical institutions scrambled to adapt. Textbooks were rewritten, and lecture halls buzzed with a new kind of excitement as instructors integrated Elara's guidelines into their curricula. The core principle was harmony over force, teaching students to listen to the magic they wielded, to work with its natural flow rather than trying to dominate it. This was not merely a new subject, it was a fundamental shift in philosophy. Yet this rapid change ignited fierce resistance. In the venerable halls of the oldest magical academies, traditionalist professors argued that this new system was dangerously unstructured. They feared it would produce a generation of mages who lacked the rigorous discipline they themselves had been forced to master. Debates raged in faculty meetings and public forums, with critics warning that this gentle approach would leave them vulnerable to any magical threat that required real, unyielding power. They saw the hybrid magic as a dilution of their proud heritage. Elara met this opposition not with argument, but with invitation. She turned her focus entirely to outreach, pouring her energy into creating a vast library of open access resources. These were not dense academic papers, but clear, practical guides with visual demonstrations, designed for self-study by any mage, anywhere, regardless of their formal training or background. She believed that knowledge, once hoarded by the powerful, was now the right of every person who held a spark of magic within them. The stakes of this open dissemination were incredibly high. If successful, it could democratize magic, breaking down the class barriers that had long separated elite academy mages from common practitioners. Magic could become a tool for healing, for building, for art, accessible to all. But if the training was rushed, if the principles were misunderstood by those without proper guidance, the consequences could be dire. A miswoven harmonic spell could just as easily soothe a magical storm as it could twist it into something new and unpredictable. The potential for accidents was a shadow that followed every success. During a public training session in a city square, Lyra stepped forward to demonstrate. A volunteer, a young man with a hand badly scarred by a backfired charm, stood nervously before her. Lyra did not chant a complex incantation or brandish a focus crystal. Instead, she hummed a single, clear note and moved her hands in a slow, weaving pattern. A soft, silver-green light bloomed between her palms, a visible fusion of modern healing energy and ancient Snow Elf resonance. She directed this light over the man's wounded hand. The crowd watched, utterly silent, as the twisted, angry tissue began to smooth, the scar fading not to nothing, but to a faint, beautiful pattern that resembled frost on a windowpane. The man flexed his fingers, his face transforming from pained anxiety to stunned wonder. He was not just healed, he was marked by a new kind of magic, one that left a testament to harmony in its wake. That single, quiet act did more to sway opinion than any debate. It was living proof that the new era was not about losing power, but about finding a better way to use it. Lyra's mastery was not announced by any formal decree, but by the quiet, effortless way she wove a bridge of solidified moonlight over a canyon river. She was the first to be recognized as a true master of the hybrid tradition. Her skill a seamless fusion of old and new that felt less like learned technique and more like a second nature. Students flocked to her, drawn not by her title, but by the clarity she brought to the most complex harmonic weaves. Her success was a living vindication of Elara's life's work, proving that the old rituals could not only coexist with modern magic, but could elevate it to an art form. Yet this bright new chapter cast its own subtle shadows. Among Elara's longtime colleagues, a quiet resentment began to simmer. They saw Lyra's meteoric rise not as a collective triumph, but as a personal slight, a suggestion that their own decades of dedication were being overshadowed by a prodigy who had not paid the same dues. Elara watched this tension with a complex mix of pride and caution. She made a deliberate choice to step back, to let Lyra's voice ring out without her own as an echo. This was the true goal, after all, not to create disciples, but to foster independent masters who could carry the work forward. The stakes of Lyra's growing influence were immense. Her teachings were spreading, codifying the hybrid system into a structured path that new mages could follow. This very success, however, galvanized the remaining purists. They watched her public lessons with intense scrutiny, their criticism now sharper and more targeted. They argued that this streamlined hybrid magic was creating a generation of practitioners who relied on intuition over rigorous discipline, potentially leaving them vulnerable in a true crisis. At a ceremony held in the Great Archive to honor Lyra's official mastership, Elara stood to the side, her heart full. The sight of her former apprentice, now a confident teacher in her own right, was the ultimate proof that the knowledge was safe, that it would endure beyond any single person. Yet as she listened to Lyra speak of the future, her mind drifted to the uncharted territories of magic that still lay ahead. The world was stable, but stability was not an end point. It was a foundation, and she could not help but wonder what new structures and what new challenges they would now be able to build upon it. The legacy project began with a single, quiet promise to ensure no ritual would ever be lost again. Elara, with Lyra now serving as her co-director, launched a global initiative to preserve and adapt every known Snow Elf ceremony, creating a living library for the world. They established centers on every continent, each one a hub of cross-cultural exchange, where mages from different traditions could study the ancient harmonies and share their own unique applications. In the coastal center, water weavers taught desert mages how to weave moisture from the air using resonant frequencies, while in the mountain center, earth singers learned to stabilize slopes with gentle, layered hums instead of brute force. This was more than research. It was a conversation between magical cultures that had been isolated for centuries. Yet this grand vision faced a constant, grinding challenge. Funding and political support ebbed and flowed with the shifting priorities of each region. One nation's generous grant could be canceled overnight by a change in leadership, while another's initial enthusiasm waned as soon as the immediate magical crises in their own territory were resolved. The project's global network was a beautiful, intricate web, but it was also fragile, vulnerable to the snap of a single political thread. Elara knew that goodwill alone would not sustain them. She turned her hard-won credibility into a tool for survival, using her influence to secure formal endorsements from the world's most prestigious magical academies. She did not ask for charity, but for investment, framing the legacy project as an essential insurance policy for the future of magic itself. A single center's failure could create a dangerous gap in their global harmonic net, a weak point where future instability could take root and spread. The stakes were the long-term security of the magical balance they had fought so hard to achieve. On the day the first permanent legacy center opened its doors, a figure approached Elara. Her eyes held the cool, timeless light of a glacier, and her presence carried the quiet hum of profound age. She was a descendant of the Snow Elves, a living bridge to the very civilization whose knowledge they had worked to save. Without a word, she pressed a smooth, cold stone into Elara's hand. A seed of memory, she explained, that would allow any who held it to experience the true intent behind the rituals, not just the technical steps. It was a gift of gratitude and a profound affirmation that their work was not just preservation, but a continuation. The stone was cool and impossibly smooth in Elara's hand, a conduit to a past she had only ever read about. The descendant, Eliana, then offered something even more profound. From the folds of her simple, timeless robes, she drew forth an ancestral staff. It was carved from pale, living wood, that seemed to hold a captured winter twilight, and at its apex rested a crystal that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, a perfect fusion of ancient resonance and modern vibrancy. This was not a relic to be studied behind glass, Eliana explained. It was a tool, crafted by the last of her people, specifically for this new age, designed to channel the hybrid magic Elara had helped birth. Its very existence was the Snow Elves' final, formal blessing on the path she had chosen. The moment Elara's fingers closed around the staff, she felt its power not as a surge, but as a deep, steady current. It amplified her own abilities, yes, but more importantly, it clarified them. When she demonstrated a complex harmonic weave, the staff helped her project the underlying principles with such crystalline clarity that students grasped them almost intuitively. It became a living symbol in the archives, a tangible piece of one world welcoming the next. Yet Eliana's approval came with a sobering warning. The Snow Elves were not the only ancient culture to perceive the great cycles of magic. Other civilizations, now slumbering in forgotten deserts or deep beneath restless seas, had their own prophecies, their own convergences awaiting a trigger. The global stability they had just achieved was not a permanent state, but merely the first calm between storms. The responsibility settled on Elara's shoulders, heavier than any scroll or artifact. She accepted the staff, and with it, the vow to look beyond her own work, to prepare not just one city or one tradition, but to build a network resilient enough to face evolutions they could not yet imagine. This encounter confirmed the Snow Elf legacy was not a closed book, but a living lineage. It also hinted that the real work was only beginning, an endless journey of discovery across a world brimming with dormant magical histories. With the staff firmly in hand, Elara felt the full weight of her role, no longer just a scholar or a reformer, but a vital bridge between all the eras of magic, past, present, and those yet to dawn. A hush fell over the great hall of magic as Elara raised the ancestral staff. The air tightened, charged with the hopes and fears of every mage present. She did not chant in the old tongue alone, nor did she rely on a modern mage's forceful incantation. Instead, she began a quiet recitation that wove the two together, a dual stream of ancient Snow Elf phrases and contemporary magical theory. The staff in her hands became the nexus, its crystal pulsing in time with her words. At first, the effect was subtle, a gentle shimmer in the air like heat haze on a summer road. Then the hall's central ley line, once a turbulent river of raw power, began to change. The chaotic swirls of energy smoothed into elegant, interlocking spirals of silver and blue, a living tapestry of harmony that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. This was the Unified Invocation, a ceremony that did not impose peace, but invited it, proving that the two schools of magic were not rivals, but complementary halves of a greater whole. The weave did not stop at the hall's walls. It expanded outward, a visible wave of stabilizing energy that flowed through the stone and into the city's streets. Mages watching from windows gasped as the very light seemed to soften, the usual sharp crackle of ambient magic replaced by a profound, resonant hum. The world did not just feel calmer, it felt right, as if a fundamental dissonance everyone had learned to live with had finally been resolved. A child's unstable, flickering light charm in a nearby park steadied into a perfect, unwavering sphere. A strained public warding spell, on the verge of failure, suddenly glowed with renewed, unshakable strength. This was not a temporary fix or a desperate measure. The energy weave was permanent, a new layer of reality woven directly into the world's magical fabric. It was the ultimate proof that the lost rituals were not historical curiosities, but the very foundation upon which a safer, more stable magical future could be built. The ancient Snow Elf Rite of Harmonic balance had not just influenced modern magic, it had completed it, offering the missing piece that transformed a powerful but volatile force into an art of enduring grace. A quiet smile touched Elara's lips as she watched from the archive's balcony. Below, in the sunlit courtyard, a new generation of mages moved through their practice. A young woman wove a shield of shimmering air, its surface rippling not with defensive tension, but with a gentle, harmonic hum. Nearby, an older man, his hands once scarred by backlashes, coaxed a fountain's water to dance in intricate, silent patterns. Their movements were confident, their faces alight not with the strain of control, but with the joy of collaboration. This was the living proof she had fought, for the ancient Snow Elf rituals were no longer lost secrets, but a vibrant, breathing part of the magical present. The wisdom of the past had not been replaced by the innovation of the present. Instead, they had learned to dance together. The rite of harmonic balance was now a foundational lesson taught to every novice, not as a historical artifact, but as a core principle for a safer, more intuitive magic. The city's very air, once thick with volatile energy, now carried the clean, resonant hum of a world in tune with itself. Her long and perilous journey, from a fugitive clutching a stolen scroll to the guardian of a global legacy, had reached its destination. She had ensured that the gentle power of the Snow Elves would never again be forgotten, that it would cradle and guide the explosive potential of modern spellwork for all time. Yet, watching the effortless flow of hybrid magic in the courtyard, she felt a profound sense of peace, not of finality. The door was not closed, it was flung wide open. The stable foundation they had built was not a cage, but a launch pad. What new forms of magic would evolve from this union? What undiscovered harmonies might future mages compose from this new, richer palette? The tapestry of magical practice was forever changed, its threads now interwoven with the silver light of the ancients, and it was a living, growing work of art, ready for the next hands to add their own unique and beautiful